A smell hit me first. Mold, sweat, and something else I couldn't identify but made my stomach turn. I opened my eyes to complete darkness, my wrists burning from the metal cuffs cutting into my skin. The concrete floor beneath me was cold and damp, seeping through the thin fabric of my torn dress. Somewhere outside this hellhole, I could hear men's voices, rough and calculating, like they were discussing livestock at a county fair. "She's big, but young. Could get some good work out of her for years," one voice said, followed by cruel laughter that made my blood freeze. I pressed my back against what felt like a wooden crate, trying to make myself invisible, which had been my survival strategy for 19 years, being 300 pounds in a town like Millbrook, Alabama meant you learned real quick how to disappear, even when you filled up most of the room. But there was no hiding from this nightmare. Have you ever felt completely alone, even when surrounded by people? That's how I'd felt my entire life, until this moment when I would have given anything to be back in that familiar loneliness instead of this terrifying unknown. 3 days earlier, I was scrubbing grease off the floor of Sal's diner, 2 in the morning, my knees screaming in pain, my uniform soaked in sweat and shame. The other girls who worked there were skinny and pretty, got tips that could feed a family. Me, I got the closing shift cleaning duty that paid minimum wage and kept me out of sight from the customers. But I needed every dollar I could scrape together. I remember walking home that night through the trailer park, past the broken streetlights and rusted mailboxes, stepping over beer bottles and trying not to breathe too deep because the whole place smelled like failure and broken dreams. Our trailer sat at the very back, number 47, with its peeling paint and sagging steps that groaned under my weight every single time. The door was already open when I got there, which should have been my first warning. Mama never left doors open. Said it let the cool air out, and the devil and I pushed through the torn screen door and found her passed out on the couch, a needle still hanging from her arm like some sick Christmas ornament. This wasn't unusual. What was unusual were the voices coming from the back bedroom. "Charlene owes 15 grand, and that's just the interest," a man's voice said. I recognized it immediately, Ezekiel Montrose, but everyone called him Zeke. If you lived in Millbrook and had any kind of addiction, debt or desperation, you knew Zeke. He was the kind of man who smiled when he hurt people. I tiptoed toward the hallway, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they'd hear it, through the crack in the bedroom door. I could see Zeke sitting on the edge of my mama's bed like he owned the place, his gold teeth catching the light from the single bare bulb overhead. 2 other men stood behind him, both looking like they bench-pressed pickup trucks for fun. "She ain't got it, and we both know she ain't gonna get it," Zeke continued, his voice smooth as honey, but twice as dangerous. "Woman can barely afford to keep the lights on, let alone pay back what she's borrowed." That's when 6-year-old Jasper appeared in the doorway of the kids' room, rubbing his eyes and asking for water in that sleepy voice that always broke my heart. He was so thin you could count his ribs, same as 4-year-old Clementine, who was still asleep on the mattress they shared on the floor. We'd been out of groceries for 3 days. Living on the free bread rolls I could sneak home from the diner. I scooped Jasper up before the men could see him, whispering that everything was okay, even though we both knew it wasn't. Nothing had been okay in our house for years, not since Daddy left and Mama started using. I'd become more of a mother to these babies than their real mama ever was, working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on and food in their bellies. "There might be another way to settle this debt," I heard Zeke say, and something in his tone made my skin crawl. I put Jasper back to bed and crept closer to listen. Through that crack in the door, I watched Zeke pull out his phone and scroll through what looked like photos. Got some buyers coming in from Atlanta next week. Rich folks looking for help around their properties. Your girl there, the big one, she's strong, could work off the debt. The way he said it made me understand this wasn't about housekeeping or yard work. This was about something much, much worse. I wanted to run. To grab Jasper and Clementine and just disappear into the Alabama night. But where could 3 broke kids go? I had $47 to my name and a 10-year-old Honda that barely started on good days. Plus, these babies depended on me. I was all they had. That's when Mama's voice cut through my thoughts, slurred and desperate. How long would she be gone? My stomach dropped to my shoes. She wasn't unconscious after all. She'd been listening to everything, and now she was negotiating away her own daughter like I was a piece of furniture she could pawn. Long as it takes, Zeke replied. Could be months, could be years. Depends on how hard she works and how much the buyers are willing to pay for her services. If you've ever had someone you trusted betray you in the worst possible way, you know that feeling that starts in your chest and spreads through your whole body like poison. It's worse than any physical pain because it comes from someone who's supposed to protect you. I heard footsteps coming toward the door and scrambled back to the couch, pretending to be asleep. Zeke emerged first, followed by his 2 goons. Then Mama stumbling behind them like a ghost in her own home. Marigold, she called softly, and I had to fight every instinct not to run. Baby, come here. Mama needs to talk to you. I sat up slowly, my whole body trembling. What's going on, Mama? Zeke smiled at me, and it was the kind of smile that made small children hide behind their parents. Your mama and I have been discussing some opportunities for you, sweetheart. Chance to see the world, help some nice families, make some real money. I don't understand, I said, though I understood perfectly. I just couldn't believe it was really happening. Pack a bag, Mama said, not meeting my eyes. Just for a little while, until I can get back on my feet. That's when I knew she was selling me her own daughter. To pay for drugs, I looked at Jasper and Clementine's bedroom door, thinking about their empty bellies and how they'd ask for me when I wasn't there to tuck them in. What about the babies? Charlene will figure it out, Zeke said. Won't you, Charlene? Mama nodded, tears streaming down her face. But she nodded anyway. The next 3 days were a blur of terror and disbelief. They kept me in that gal pow, barely fed me, and I listened to other voices, other people crying, other families being torn apart by desperation and greed. The smell of fear became as familiar as breathing. An older woman named Pearl was chained. Next to me told me she'd been sold by her nephew to pay his gambling debts. She whispered stories about where we might end up, what might happen to us, and each story was worse than the last. Sugar, she said on the second night, you gotta understand these people don't see us as human. We're property to them, merchandise. But even as she said it, even as I lived it, part of me couldn't believe this was really my life now. This was America, 2008. Not some history book about slavery. Things like this didn't happen to people like me, except they did, and they were. On the 3rd morning, they came for all of us, loaded us into the back of a windowless van, like cattle heading to slaughter. The ride seemed to last forever, winding through back roads I didn't recognize. Past fields of cotton that reminded me of how little things had really changed in the South. When the van finally stopped, they dragged us out into a massive barn that had been converted into something that looked like a twisted auction house. There were bleachers filled with well-dressed men and women, sipping drinks and chatting like they were at a church social instead of buying human beings. And that's where I saw him for the first time. Sitting in the front row, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my family made in a year. Dark hair, green eyes, and something about his face that seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. But when our eyes met across that barn, when I turned around on that auction block, feeling more humiliated than I'd ever felt in my life, I saw something in his expression that stopped my heart. Recognition, like he knew exactly who I was. The auctioneer's voice cut through the air like a whip. Next up, we got ourselves a sturdy girl, 19 years old, strong as an ox, and twice as useful. Starting bid at $5,000. My legs nearly gave out. $5,000. That's what my life was worth to these people. Less than what some folks paid for a used car. I tried to cover myself with my arms, but the dress they'd given me was thin and torn, offering no protection from the hungry stares of the crowd. A woman in pearls raised her hand. $6,000. She'd be perfect for the farm work. $7,000. Called out a man with a thick cigar hanging from his lips. My wife needs help with the heavy lifting around the house. Each bid felt like a slap across my face. I wanted to scream, to tell them I had a name, that I was somebody's daughter, somebody's sister. But the gag in my mouth turned my protests into muffled sounds that only seemed to amuse the crowd more. That's when I heard his voice. Clear and confident, cutting through the chatter. $15,000. The barn went dead silent. Even the auctioneer looked shocked. $15,000 was more than double the highest bid. More money than most people in Millbrook saw in a year. Every head turned toward the man in the expensive suit, the one whose eyes had stopped my heart just moments before. Have you ever had a moment where time seemed to freeze, where everything around you faded away except for one person? One face, one pair of eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. That's what happened when I looked at him again. He stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact with me. There was something about the way he moved, confident, but not arrogant. Like he owned every room he walked into, but didn't need to prove it to anyone. His suit was tailored perfectly. His shoes probably cost more than I made in 6 months at the diner. But it wasn't his wealth that caught my attention. It was his eyes. Green like bottle glass, but familiar in a way that made my chest ache with a memory I couldn't quite grasp. $15,000. Going once, the auctioneer announced. Clearly delighted with this unexpected windfall, I watched as other potential buyers shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. $15,000 is serious money. The kind that said this wasn't just about acquiring help around the house. This was about something else entirely. Going twice. The man in the suit reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope thick with cash. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized this was really happening. In less than 30 seconds, I would belong to this stranger, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Do you know what it feels like to be reduced to an object? To watch people discuss your worth in dollars and cents while you stand there helpless? It's a special kind of violation that cuts deeper than any physical wound. Sold to the gentleman in the front row for $15,000. The crowd erupted in murmurs and scattered applause, like they'd just witnessed a particularly good horse race instead of the sale of a human being. I felt my knees buckle, but somehow managed to stay upright as two men approached to lead me off the platform. That's when something strange happened. As they guided me down the wooden steps, past the crowd of buyers and spectators, the man who'd purchased me stepped forward. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they'd done real work, despite his obvious wealth. But it was his face that stopped me cold. Not just handsome in that generic way rich men often are, but familiar, deeply, impossibly familiar. "Wait," he said to the men escorting me, his voice carrying an authority that made them freeze instantly. "I'll take her from here." One of Zeke's men stepped forward, the same gorilla who'd been at our trailer 3 nights ago. Money first, then the merchandise. The word merchandise hit me like a physical blow. That's all I was to these people, a thing to be bought and sold, used and discarded. The stranger handed over the envelope without hesitation, then did something I'll never forget as long as I live. He looked directly at me, not through me or around me like I was invisible, but at me like I was a real person worthy of basic human dignity. "My name is Sterling," he said quietly, his voice meant for my ears alone, "and I promise you, everything is going to be okay." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him, but I'd heard promises before. Mama promised she'd get clean. Daddy promised he'd come back. The social worker promised Jasper and Clementine would be better off. Promises were just words people used to make themselves feel better about doing terrible things. Sterling gently took my arm, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who'd just bought another human being. As he led me toward the barn exit, I caught glimpses of the other merchandise still waiting their turn on the auction block. Pearl, the older woman who'd whispered comfort to me in the warehouse, stood trembling as the auctioneer described her experience in domestic service. A teenage boy who couldn't have been more than 16 was being examined like livestock while potential buyers discussed his potential for outdoor labor. A young mother clutched a baby to her chest while the auctioneer explained they were being sold as a package deal. If you think human trafficking is something that only happens in movies or foreign countries, let me tell you something. It was happening right here in rural Alabama, in barns owned by respected members of the community, attended by people who went to church every Sunday and acted like pillars of society. As we walked through the crowd, I heard fragments of conversation that made my stomach turn. Got myself a good deal on that field hand. The girl I bought last year worked out real well. Hardly had to feed her at all. These people are used to hard living anyway. Sterling's jaw tightened with each comment, his grip on my arm growing more protective than possessive. Whatever his reasons for buying me, he seemed genuinely disgusted by the casual cruelty surrounding us. We reached his car, a black BMW that looked completely out of place in this nightmare landscape. He opened the passenger door for me, another gesture that caught me off guard. When was the last time anyone had opened a door for me? When was the last time anyone had treated me with even basic courtesy? But as I slid into the leather seat that probably cost more than my family's monthly rent, reality crashed back down on me. No matter how kind Sterling seemed, no matter how gentle his touch or respectful his manner, the fact remained that he had just purchased me like a piece of property. It was his now, to do with as he pleased. The thought sent waves of panic through my body. My hands shook as Sterling walked around to the driver's side, my mind racing with possibilities of what might happen next. Would he take me to some isolated farm where I'd work until I dropped? Would he lock me in a basement and use me for things? I didn't want to think about would I ever see Jasper and Clementine again. When Sterling got in the car, he immediately reached over and began working on the restraints around my wrists. The metal cuffs had cut deep enough to draw blood, and he handled the wounds with surprising care. "I'm sorry about this," he said softly, dabbing at the cuts with a handkerchief from his pocket. "I'm sorry about all of this." His words confused me more than anything else that had happened. Why would someone who just bought a person apologize for the circumstances? Why would he seem genuinely pained by my injuries when he'd willingly participated in the system that caused them? But it was when he said my name that my world completely shifted on its axis. "Hello, Marigold, Evangeline Thornfield," he said, his voice thick with emotion I couldn't identify. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. How did he know my full name? More importantly, how did he know my middle name? The only people who knew that were family, and most of our family was either dead gone or high out of their minds. I stared at his profile as he started the car, trying to place those features in my memory: the strong jawline, the way his hair curled slightly at the edges, the small scar above his left eyebrow. All of it seemed familiar, like looking at a photograph that had been buried in an old shoebox for years. That's when it hit me. Not the full memory. Not yet, but a fragment. A flash of a summer day long ago. A boy with green eyes teaching me how to skip stones at the creek behind our old house. A boy who always shared his candy with me when the other kids called me names. A boy who disappeared one day when his family packed up and left town without warning. But that was impossible. That boy had been my cousin, and his family had moved away when I was 8 years old. His name had been ... I turned to look at Sterling again, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Because suddenly, impossibly, I remembered exactly who he was. Sterling Nathaniel Ashworth, I whispered, the name falling from my lips like a prayer. I'd forgotten how to say. He pulled the car over to the side of the dirt road, so abruptly that gravel sprayed against the windows. When he turned to face me, tears were streaming down his cheeks, and I saw in his adult face the ghost of the 12-year-old boy who used to protect me from playground bullies. You remember? He said, his voice breaking on the words. How could I forget? Sterling had been my hero when I was little, back when we lived in the house on Maple Street, before everything fell apart. He was my daddy's sister's boy, 4 years older than me, and light years more confident. While other kids made fun of my size, Sterling would sit with me during family gatherings, teaching me card tricks and telling me stories about places far away from Millbrook. The memories came flooding back like a dam, bursting in my mind. Sterling building me a treehouse in his backyard because I was too heavy for the rope swing. Sterling walking me to school when the other kids threw rocks. Sterling promising me that someday we'd both get out of this town and see the world together. Then one day, when I was 8 and he was 12, they were just gone. His daddy's construction business had failed, and the whole family packed up in the middle of the night to avoid creditors. I remember running to their empty house, pressing my face against the windows, wondering if I'd done something wrong to make them leave without saying goodbye. I looked for you, Sterling said, reaching over to touch my hand with trembling fingers. When I turned 18 and had the resources, I hired private investigators. But your family had moved so many times, left so many forwarded addresses, that led nowhere. It took me 16 years to find you. 16 years. I tried to process that information while staring at this man who'd somehow transformed from the gangly boy I remembered into someone who could casually drop $15,000 on a human auction. What happened to you? How did you get rich? He smiled sadly. Full scholarship to Georgia Tech, then law school at Emory. Started my own firm in Atlanta. Specialized in corporate litigation. Made more money than I knew what to do with. But none of it mattered because I couldn't find the one person who'd mattered most to me when I was a kid. I wanted to feel happy, to feel relief that someone from my past had cared enough to search for me all these years. But sitting in that expensive car, still wearing the torn dress from the auction, still tasting the humiliation of being sold like livestock, I couldn't escape the horrible irony of the situation. You bought me, I said quietly. You literally bought me, Sterling, his face crumpled with pain. I know how it looks, but Marigold, I swear to you, I've been tracking these operations for months, trying to find a way to bring them down. When I heard your name on the list, when I realized it was really you. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our childhood when he was frustrated. I couldn't let anyone else take you. I couldn't risk what might happen. So you participated in buying people instead? I infiltrated, he corrected. There's a difference. The FBI is building a case against Zeke Montrose and his entire network. But they needed someone on the inside. Someone who could blend in with these sick bastards and gather evidence. FBI. The word hit me like a physical blow. You're working with the FBI. Sterling reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge and identification. Special Agent Sterling Ashworth, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I stared at the official seal, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything I thought I knew about my childhood cousin. I've been undercover for 8 months, he explained. Built a false identity as a wealthy businessman with questionable morals. Tonight was supposed to be my last operation before we moved in for arrests. But then I saw your name on that list, and everything changed. The car felt like it was spinning, even though we were sitting still. Nothing made sense anymore. My cousin, Sterling, the boy who used to share his lunch money with me, had grown up to become an FBI agent. He'd spent 8 months pretending to be the kind of person who bought human beings, all to catch the real monsters, and somehow, impossibly, fate had put me right in the middle of his investigation. The babies, I said suddenly, panic rising in my chest. Sterling, I have to go back for Jasper and Clementine. They're alone with Mama, and she's not capable of taking care of them. I know about them, Sterling said gently. I know about your mother's addiction, about your 3 jobs, about how you've been basically raising those kids since you were 14. I know about all of it, Marigold. Then you know I can't just disappear. Those babies need me, and they're going to have you, he promised. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. What happened tonight? What almost happened to you? ... We can't let Zeke know that you're anything other than another transaction to him. I leaned back against the leather seat, overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. On one hand, relief flooded through me, knowing that Sterling wasn't actually the kind of monster who purchased people for exploitation. On the other hand, the realization that I was now tangled up in an FBI operation made everything exponentially more dangerous. What happens now? I asked. Now, we're going to a safe house that the Bureau has set up. You're going to recover from this trauma, and we're going to plan how to take down the entire network without putting you or your siblings in danger. And after that, Sterling's expression softened, and for a moment I saw the boy I remembered, the one who'd promised we'd see the world together. After that, we make sure you and those kids have everything you need to build the life you deserve. The word deserve stuck in my throat. What did I deserve? I'd spent so many years being told I was worthless, first by classmates who mocked my weight, then by employers who treated me like I was lucky to have any job at all, and finally by my own mother, who'd literally sold me to pay for drugs. I don't know what I deserve, I admitted. You deserve everything good in this world, Sterling said with such conviction that I almost believed him. You deserve to finish school, to go to college if you want. You deserve to see those places we used to talk about when we were kids. You deserve to never have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, or whether the lights are going to get turned off. Tears started flowing down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, real genuine hope, that maybe my story didn't have to end in poverty and desperation. But even as that hope bloomed in my chest, reality crashed back down. Sterling, you don't understand. I'm not the same person you remember from when we were kids. I'm not. I gestured helplessly at my body, at the way I filled up the entire passenger seat of his expensive car. You're not what? Look at me, I said, shame burning my cheeks. I'm 300 pounds, Sterling. I dropped out of school when I was 16, to work more hours. I've got no education, no skills, except scrubbing floors and washing dishes. I'm not someone you save. I'm someone you forget about and move on." From the silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, Sterling did something that completely shattered what was left of my defenses. He reached over and took my face in his hands, forcing me to look directly into his eyes. "Marigold Evangeline Thornfield," he said, his voice steady and sure, "you are the little girl who used to bandage birds with broken wings. You're the person who gave away your own school lunch every day to kids who had even less than you did. You're the teenager who sacrificed her own education to make sure her baby siblings had food and shelter. You're the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever known. And your worth has nothing to do with what you weigh or how much money you have. Have you ever had someone see the real you? Not the version you present to the world. Not the person you think you should be, but the actual core of who you are, underneath all the pain and shame and fear." That's what Sterling was doing, and it terrified me as much as it healed me. "I've carried the guilt of leaving you behind for 16 years, he continued. "Every success I've had, every good thing that's happened to me, has been shadowed by the knowledge that I'd abandoned the person who needed me most. I'm not here to save you because you're helpless. I'm here because you saved me first, just by being yourself." The weight of his words settled over me like a warm blanket, but also like a heavy responsibility. Could I really trust this? Could I allow myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, my cousin had grown up to become the kind of man who would move heaven and earth to keep a childhood promise? Sterling started the car again, and we drove in comfortable silence toward whatever came next. I watched the familiar landmarks of Millbrook fade in the rearview mirror and wondered if I'd ever see this place again. Part of me hoped I wouldn't, but a bigger part worried about the life I was leaving behind, even if it hadn't been much of a life at all. "Sterling," I said as we turned onto the highway leading away from town, "what if this doesn't work?" "What? Something goes wrong with your investigation? Or what if Zeke figures out who you really are?" He glanced over at me, and his expression was so fierce, so protective, that it took my breath away. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you and those kids are safe. Case or no case, FBI or no FBI, you're family, and I don't abandon family, not again." As we drove through the Alabama darkness, toward an uncertain future, I found myself believing him. Maybe it was foolish, maybe I was setting myself up for another devastating betrayal, but for the first time in 11 years, I felt like someone was fighting for me instead of against me. But what I didn't know then was that the hardest part of our story was still ahead of us. The safe house turned out to be a modest cabin tucked away in the woods about an hour outside Montgomery. As Sterling pulled into the gravel driveway, motion sensor lights flooded the area, revealing a well-maintained property that looked like it belonged to a regular family, not federal agents conducting undercover operations. "Nobody will think to look for you here," Sterling said as he turned off the engine. "This place isn't officially connected to the Bureau. I bought it with my own money 3 years ago." "You bought it?" I asked, confused. "Why would you need your own safe house?" Sterling's jaw tightened, and for the first time since he'd revealed his identity, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Let's just say that sometimes official channels move too slowly when people's lives are at stake." As we walked up the porch steps, I noticed details that seemed oddly personal for a federal safe house. Wind chimes hung from the eaves there, gentle music carried by the night breeze. Flower boxes lined the windows, filled with what looked like carefully tended roses and jasmine. This wasn't just a hideout, it was someone's refuge. Inside, the cabin was even more surprising. Instead of the sterile temporary feel I'd expected, The space was warm and inviting, handmade quilts draped over comfortable furniture. Family photos covered the mantelpiece, and the scent of lavender and vanilla made everything feel like a real home. "Whose place is this really?" I asked, running my fingers over a bookshelf filled with well-worn novels and family albums. Sterling sat heavily on the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "It was supposed to be ours, mine and my fiancé's. We were going to get married here, make it our weekend retreat from the city." The word fiancé hit me like a punch to the stomach, though I couldn't understand why. Of course, Sterling had someone in his life, a successful, handsome FBI agent who could afford to drop $15,000 without blinking, would naturally have found love with someone worthy of his status. Was I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. "She died 2 years ago. Car accident on I-85 caused by a drunk driver who got 6 months in county jail." His voice was flat, emotionless in the way people get when they've told a story too many times. "Rebecca was a social worker, spent her days trying to save kids from situations like he gestured vaguely in my direction, like mine." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I sat down across from him, studying his face in the lamplight. Now I could see the lines of grief etched around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried more weight than just his expensive suits. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "She would have loved this," Sterling said, looking around the cabin. "Helping you? I mean, Rebecca always said the system failed. People like you and me, kids who fell through the cracks because their families were too broken to catch them. People like you." I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. "Sterling, you're an FBI agent with your own law firm. You drive a BMW and buy safe houses with your spare change. How exactly are you like me?" His laugh was bitter. "You think growing up was easy for me after we left Millbrook? My father's business didn't just fail. Marigold, he embezzled money from his clients to cover his gambling debts. We didn't just move away. We fled in the middle of the night with bounty hunters on our trail." This was news to me. I'd always wondered why the Ashworths had left so suddenly, but I'd been 8 years old and focused on my own family's problems. I didn't know. "Of course you didn't. We ended up in a homeless shelter in Birmingham, then a series of foster homes when Dad got arrested and Mom had a nervous breakdown. You think I got that scholarship to Georgia Tech because I was privileged? I got it because I studied 18 hours a day in public libraries, because I was determined to never be that powerless again." The image of Sterling I'd been building in my mind since he'd revealed his identity began to shift and blur. I'd seen his success and assumed it had come easily, that he'd somehow been born into the kind of privilege that insulated people from real hardship. Every case I work, every trafficking ring I help dismantle, I see kids who remind me of us, Sterling continued. Kids who get caught up in systems designed to chew them up and spit them out. When I heard your name on that list, when I realized that despite everything I'd achieved, I'd still failed to protect the one person who'd mattered most to me as a child. "You didn't fail me," I interrupted. "You were 12 years old when your family left. What were you supposed to do?" "I was supposed to keep the promise I made to you," he said fiercely. "Remember, the day before we left, when I found you crying by the creek, because Tommy Hendricks had called you a fat pig in front of the whole class. I promised you that someday I'd come back and take you away from all the people who made you feel small." The memory hit me like a physical blow. I'd buried it so deep, I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. But now it came rushing back, with perfect clarity. Sterling kneeling beside me in the mud, his 12-year-old hands wiping away my tears, his voice serious as he made that promise. "I've spent 16 years trying to keep that promise," Sterling said. "Building the resources, developing the skills, positioning myself to actually do something meaningful when I found you. Tonight wasn't just about an FBI operation. Tonight was about finally being able to protect you the way I should have all those years ago. I wanted to feel grateful. I wanted to feel relieved that someone cared enough to spend 16 years searching for me. But instead, all I felt was a crushing weight of obligation mixed with shame so deep it threatened to drown me. "Don't you understand?" I said, my voice rising with emotions I couldn't contain. "You've built this whole fantasy around saving me, but look at what you're saving. I'm not the 8-year-old girl you remember, Sterling. I'm a high school dropout who scrubs toilets for a living and whose own mother sold her for drug money. You've wasted 16 years of your life chasing after someone who doesn't exist anymore. Have you ever felt like such a disappointment that you couldn't bear to look at yourself in the mirror?" That's how I felt sitting in that beautiful cabin, surrounded by evidence of the life Sterling had built, while I'd been slowly drowning in poverty and shame. "You think this is about charity?" Sterling stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "You think I spent 8 months infiltrating human trafficking rings because I felt sorry for some girl I used to know, didn't you?" He turned to face me, and the intensity in his eyes made me shrink back into the couch. "I did it because you're the only person who ever made me feel like I was worth something when I had nothing else to offer. You think I don't remember how you shared your Halloween candy with me, even though you only got 3 pieces? How you let me sleep in your room when my parents were fighting so loud the whole neighborhood could hear? How you never once made me feel ashamed that my clothes were secondhand and my shoes had holes in them?" I stared at him, speechless. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. Some version of myself that had been buried under years of trauma and survival. "You want to know the truth," Sterling continued, his voice raw with emotion. "The truth is that every good thing I've done in my life, every person I've helped, every case I've solved, has been because I was trying to become the kind of person who deserved to know you. Rebecca used to say I was driven by guilt, and she was right. But it wasn't guilt about failing you. It was guilt about not being worthy of the love you showed me when we were kids." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the Alabama countryside. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever I said next would determine whether I fell or found solid ground. "Sterling," I said quietly, "what exactly do you want from me?" It was the question that had been lurking beneath everything else, the fear that had been growing in my chest since the moment he'd said my name in that auction barn. Because even if his intentions were pure, even if he really was the hero he appeared to be, the fact remained that he had purchased me. He owned me, at least on paper, and I had no idea what that meant for my future. "I want you to let me help you build the life you deserve," he said. "I want you to go back to school if that's what you want, or learn a trade, or start a business. I want to make sure Jasper and Clementine grow up in a house where they never have to worry about having enough food or whether the adults in their lives will protect them. And what do you get out of it?" Sterling's expression softened, and he sat back down across from me. "I get to keep a promise I made to the most important person in my childhood. I get to finally use all this wealth and influence for something that actually matters." It sounded too good to be true, which in my experience meant it probably was. People didn't just rescue other people out of childhood nostalgia, especially not when it required the kind of resources Sterling was talking about. But as I looked into his eyes, searching for signs of deception or hidden agenda, all I saw was the boy who used to build me kingdoms out of cardboard boxes and tell me I was brave enough to be a princess. "There's something else," Sterling said, his voice hesitant. "Something I need to tell you before we go any further." My stomach dropped. Here it comes, I thought, the catch. The price I'd have to pay for his help. The FBI operation isn't over. Taking down Zeke and his network is going to require testimony from victims, evidence gathering, possibly months of legal proceedings. If you agree to help us, you'll be putting yourself at risk. These people don't hesitate to eliminate witnesses. I thought about Pearl, still waiting in that warehouse for someone to purchase her like livestock. I thought about the teenage boy and the young mother with her baby, all of them trapped in a system that treated human beings like inventory. What would I have to do? Testify about what happened to you. Help us understand how they operate, who their clients are, how they move people from place to place. It won't be easy, and it definitely won't be safe. I closed my eyes, weighing my options. I could walk away, take Sterling's money and disappear, start over somewhere far from Alabama and never look back. Or I could stay and fight, use my experience to help bring down the monsters who'd stolen my freedom and were still stealing it from others. When I opened my eyes, Sterling was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope mixed with fear, determination shadowed by doubt. If I do this, I said slowly, if I help you with your case, what happens to Jasper and Clementine while I'm testifying against people who want me dead? Sterling smiled for the first time since we'd arrived at the cabin, and it transformed his entire face. They come with us, all of us, together, just like it should have been from the beginning. As I sat there in that warm, safe cabin, surrounded by the ghost of Sterling's lost love and the promise of a future I'd never dared to imagine, I realized I was about to make the most important decision of my life. But what I didn't know was that someone else was making decisions about my future too, and those decisions would change everything. The decision came to me like lightning striking twice in the same place. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Sterling, seeing not just my childhood cousin, but a man who'd spent his entire adult life becoming someone who could actually make a difference. I'll do it, I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. I'll testify. I'll help with the investigation, whatever you need. But we're getting Jasper and Clementine tonight. Sterling's eyes widened. Marigold, it's too dangerous. If Zeke sees us back in Millbrook before the operation is complete, then we'd better make sure he doesn't see us, I interrupted. Those babies have been alone for 3 days already. God knows what state Mama's in, or if she's even conscious enough to feed them. I won't wait another night while they're scared and hungry and wondering why I abandoned them. Have you ever felt that moment when something inside you just snaps? Not breaks, but snaps into place, like a bone that's been set wrong finally healing properly? That's what happened to me in that cabin. For 19 years, I'd been living like I was apologizing for taking up space in the world, but sitting there, thinking about Jasper's thin little arms and Clementine's quiet way of crying when she was hungry, something fundamental shifted. I wasn't just Marigold the fat girl anymore. I wasn't just the daughter whose own mother sold her for drugs. I was the person those babies depended on, and I'd be damned if I was going to let them down. Sterling studied my face for a long moment, and I could practically see him weighing the risks against the determination he saw there. If we do this, we do it my way. Full FBI backup, coordinated entry, the works. This isn't just about rescuing your siblings anymore. This is about gathering enough evidence to bring down the entire network. What does that mean? It means we wire you up, send you back to that trailer like you escaped from whoever bought you. We get Zeke talking about the operation, about where the other victims are being held, about who his buyers are. It's dangerous as hell, but it could give us everything we need. The thought of facing Zeke again made my stomach turn to ice. But when I pictured Pearl and that teenage boy still trapped in that warehouse, still waiting for someone to care enough to save them. I knew I didn't have a choice. How long do we have? Sterling was already reaching for his phone. The FBI team can be in position within 2 hours. But Marigold, once we start this, there's no going back. If something goes wrong, if Zeke suspects anything, he won't, I said with a confidence that surprised us both. You know why? Because men like Zeke think women like me are invisible. He's never really looked at me, never thought of me as anything more than merchandise. That's going to be his mistake. For the next hour, Sterling briefed me on everything I needed to know. The FBI had been building their case against Zeke's network for over a year, tracking victims across 3 states, but they needed inside testimony to make the charges stick. They knew about the warehouse where I'd been held, but they needed to know about the other locations, the transport routes, the buyers who were still out there purchasing human beings. The wire is undetectable, Sterling explained, showing me a device no bigger than a button. But you have to get him talking naturally. Can't sound like you're fishing for information. Trust me, I said, after what he put me through, getting him to brag about his business won't be hard. If you've ever had to prepare for the most terrifying moment of your life, you know that strange mix of calm and panic that settles over you. Every detail becomes crystal clear, while your heart tries to hammer its way out of your chest. Sterling drove us back toward Millbrook in a different car, an older Ford that wouldn't stand out in the trailer park. As we got closer to town, I could see FBI vehicles positioned at strategic points, looking like regular traffic to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Remember, Sterling said as we turned into the trailer park. Your story is that you escaped when your buyer stopped for gas. You've been walking for hours. You're scared and exhausted, and you just want to get your siblings and disappear. Don't try to be clever. Just be traumatized. It won't be hard to fake. He was right about that. The closer we got to trailer 47, the more real my trauma became. My hands started shaking as I saw the familiar broken streetlights, the rusted mailboxes, the life I'd thought I'd escaped from forever. Marigold, Sterling said, stopping the car 3 trailers down from ours. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. I looked at him, this man who'd spent 16 years searching for me, who'd built his entire career around helping people like us, and I realized something that changed everything. Yes, I do, I said. Not because I have to, but because I want to. For the first time in my life, I want to fight back. The FBI wire felt strange against my skin as I walked up the broken steps to our trailer. The door was still open, hanging off its hinges like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Inside, I could hear voices, Zeke's voice, and something else, crying. Clementine was crying. I pushed through the screen door like I'd done 1,000 times before. But this time I wasn't the scared girl who cleaned floors for minimum wage. This time, I was someone with purpose. Well, Zeke's voice cut through the stale air. Look what the cat dragged in. He was sitting in the same spot where I'd left him 3 days ago. Except now Jasper was huddled in the corner behind him, his little face streaked with tears and dirt. Clementine was in Mama's arms, but Mama looked even worse than before, barely, conscious and swaying like she might fall over any second. Where the hell have you been, girl? Zeke demanded. Standing up with that predatory smile I remembered too well. My buyer in Atlanta is mighty upset that his merchandise went missing. This was it, the moment everything depended on. I let myself feel all the fear, all the rage, all the helplessness I'd been carrying for 3 days, and I used it. I ran, I said, letting my voice shake. When he stopped for gas, I ran. I've been walking all night, hiding in the woods. Zeke, please, I'm sorry. I just got scared. Scared? Zeke laughed, and it was the sound of broken glass. You cost me $15,000, you fat bitch. You think sorry's gonna cover that? I'll work it off, I said quickly, moving toward Jasper and Clementine. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't hurt the babies. Oh. You'll work it off all right, Zeke said, grabbing my arm hard enough to leave bruises, but not the way you think. See, word's getting around about my business, and I need to expand operations. Got buyers coming in from as far as Texas now, looking for specific types. This was exactly what Sterling and the FBI needed to hear. I kept my face scared while inside. Part of me felt grimly satisfied that this monster was about to confess to federal crimes. What kind of operations? I asked, making it sound like I was just trying to understand what would happen to me. Import-export, Zeke said, clearly enjoying having someone to brag to. Got a warehouse operation running out of Montgomery. Another one near Mobile. Moving product all up and down the coast now. Your little escape stunt actually taught me something. Need better security, better transport methods. He was giving them everything. Locations, scale of operations, transport routes. Keep talking, I thought. Keep digging your own grave. Course, might not matter much longer anyway, Zeke continued, pouring himself a drink from a bottle on the counter. Big buyer coming in next week. Wants to purchase the whole operation. Man from overseas, got deep pockets and big plans for expansion. My blood ran cold. If someone bought out Zeke's entire network, all the victims would disappear into an even larger, more sophisticated operation. We were running out of time. Expansion, I asked. International markets, Zeke said proudly. Ship product overseas where they're not so picky about paperwork and regulations. This buyer, he's got connections in places where people like you and these brats just disappear permanently. That's when Jasper spoke up, his little voice barely a whisper. Marigold, are you really here? The sound of his voice, so small and scared and hopeful, nearly broke my heart and my cover at the same time. I wanted to run to him, to scoop him up and promise everything would be okay, but I had to stay in character just a little longer. I'm here, baby, I said, my voice thick with real emotion. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah, you are, Zeke said. All three of you are. Turns out, there's a market for family packages, especially young ones. Kids adapt faster to new situations, learn languages quicker, more valuable in the long run. He was talking about selling Jasper and Clementine. My 6-year-old and 4-year-old siblings, the rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. You touch those children and I'll kill you myself, I said, and this time I wasn't acting. Zeke's smile faltered for just a second as he saw something in my eyes that he hadn't expected. You ain't in no position to make threats, girl. Actually, a voice said from the doorway. She is. Sterling stepped through the broken screen door, and behind him, I could see FBI agents moving into position around the trailer. He had his gun drawn and his badge visible, looking every inch the federal agent he was. Ezekiel Montrose, Sterling announced. You're under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, and about 15 other federal charges we're going to enjoy discussing. For a moment, Zeke just stared, his mouth hanging open like he couldn't process what was happening. Then his eyes darted to me, and I saw understanding dawn. You set me up, he said, his voice filled with a rage that would have terrified me 3 days ago. Now it just made me feel powerful. No, I said, standing up to my full height and looking him straight in the eye. You set yourself up, I just gave you the rope. What happened next was like something out of a movie.
You touch
FBI agents flooded the trailer, shouting commands and securing the scene. Zeke tried to run, but Sterling tackled him before he made it 3 steps. Mama, still half conscious, was loaded into an ambulance for medical evaluation and drug treatment. And me, I scooped up Jasper and Clementine, holding them tight while they cried and whispered my name over and over, like a prayer of gratitude. "You did it," Sterling said, appearing beside me as the chaos continued around us. "You got everything we needed. Marigold, you just helped us save dozens of people." I looked around at the FBI agents, at Zeke being led away in handcuffs, at my siblings safe in my arms, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pride, real, genuine pride in who I was and what I'd accomplished. But even as federal agents assured me that other victims were being rescued simultaneously at the warehouse locations Zeke had revealed, even as Sterling explained that the international buyer would be intercepted before he could disappear with any victims, I knew our story wasn't over, because sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving the nightmare. Sometimes the hardest part is figuring out how to live after it's over. 6 months later, I stood in front of a mirror that didn't lie to me anymore. Not because my body had changed dramatically, though I'd lost some weight through proper nutrition and regular meals. Not because I was wearing expensive clothes, though Sterling had insisted on buying me a whole new wardrobe. The mirror didn't lie because I finally saw myself the way Sterling had always seen me. The way Jasper and Clementine had always seen me. The way I should have seen myself all along. I was getting ready for the biggest day of my life. Today, I could walk into a federal courthouse and testify against Zeke Montrose and the entire trafficking network we'd helped dismantle. Today, I would stand up in front of judges and lawyers and news cameras and tell the world exactly what these monsters had done to me and dozens of other victims. Have you ever had to choose between staying invisible and stepping into the light? That's what this day represented for me. I could have stayed in the background, let other witnesses carry the burden of testimony. But I'd learned something important over the past 6 months. My voice mattered. My story mattered. And if sharing it could prevent even one other family from being torn apart the way mine had been, then every terrifying moment would be worth it. "You ready for this, sweetheart?" Sterling's voice came from the doorway of the bedroom that had become mine in the house he'd bought for us in Montgomery. It was a real house, with a yard where Jasper could play, and a kitchen where Clementine could help me make cookies. More importantly, it was a place where we were safe. "I've been ready for this my whole life," I said, and meant it. "I just didn't know it until now." Sterling smiled, that same gentle expression that had carried me through the hardest months of recovery and healing. He'd been more than my cousin during this time. He'd been my advocate, my protector, my guide back to believing in myself. But more than that, he'd become my best friend again, just like when we were kids. "The prosecution says your testimony will likely be the key to conviction," Sterling said. "Zeke's lawyers are trying to plea bargain, but with everything you helped, U.S. record, plus the other evidence we gathered, they don't have much room to negotiate." I thought about Pearl, who I'd visited just last week at the residential facility where she was recovering. She'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she thanked me for giving her the courage to testify to. The teenage boy Marcus had been reunited with family in Georgia and was starting college in the fall. The young mother, Isabella, had gotten her baby back and was working with social services to rebuild her life. All of us had found our voices. All of us were refusing to be invisible anymore. "Where are the babies?" I asked, using the nickname that still made Jasper roll his eyes, even though he secretly loved it. "Clementine's helping Mrs. Whitfield make lunch," Sterling said. "Jasper's in the backyard with his tutor, working on multiplication tables. Cordelia May Whitfield had moved in with us 2 months ago, when her own health started failing. She'd become the grandmother these kids had never had. And having her there meant I could pursue my education without worrying about childcare. It was perfect, in a way that still sometimes took my breath away, because that was the thing about my new life. It wasn't just that we had money now, or safety, or even love. It was that for the first time, I was building something instead of just surviving something. I was taking classes at the community college, working toward my GED, and then hopefully a nursing degree. I wanted to work with trauma survivors, wanted to help other people find their way back to believing they deserved good things. But first, I had to get through today. The courthouse was surrounded by news vans when we arrived. Sterling had warned me this might happen, that the case had attracted national attention because of the scope of the trafficking network and the number of victims involved. But seeing all those cameras, knowing that people across the country would hear my story, made my stomach flutter with nerves. "Remember," Sterling said as we walked up the courthouse steps, "you're not the same person who got sold at that auction. You're not even the same person who helped us arrest Zeke. You're Marigold Evangeline Thornfield, and you're about to change the world." The courtroom was packed. I recognized some faces. FBI agents who'd worked the case, social workers who'd helped with victim services, other survivors who'd come to support each other. But there were also strangers, people who'd followed the case in the news. Advocates for trafficking victims, law students studying how justice actually works, and in the front row, wearing orange jumpsuits and restraints, sat the defendants. Zeke Montrose looked smaller than I remembered, his gold teeth hidden behind a scowl that no longer had the power to frighten me. Next to him sat 3 other men who'd been arrested in the raids, all of them refusing to meet my eyes as I walked to the witness stand. When the prosecutor asked me to state my name for the record, my voice was clear and strong. "Marigold Evangeline Thornfield." "Ms. Thornfield, can you tell the court about the events of October 15th of last year?" And I did. I told them everything. About the trailer park and Mama's addiction and working 3 jobs to keep us afloat. About the night Zeke came to collect a debt and decided my body was payment enough. About 3 days in that warehouse, listening to other victims cry in the darkness. About standing on that auction block, feeling less human than I'd ever felt in my life. But I also told them about finding my strength, about choosing to help the FBI, even when it meant putting myself in danger, about looking Zeke in the eye and refusing to be afraid anymore. Do you know what it feels like to watch your tormentors shrink as you find your voice? Every word I spoke, every detail I shared, every emotion I let the courtroom see, Zeke seemed to get smaller and smaller. By the time I finished my testimony, he looked like exactly what he was, a pathetic man who'd built his entire sense of power on the suffering of people he thought were beneath him. The defense attorney tried to break me during cross-examination, suggesting that I'd made up details or exaggerated my trauma for sympathy. But I'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment. 6 months working with therapists and victim advocates to understand that my truth didn't need defending, it just needed telling. "Miss Thornfield," the defense attorney said, "isn't it true that you willingly participated in illegal activities to entrap my client?" "No," I said calmly. "What's true is that your client trafficked human beings for profit, and I helped the FBI stop him from destroying more lives." When I stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later, the entire courtroom erupted in applause. The judge had to call for order, but not before I saw tears in the eyes of court reporters and federal agents, who'd heard hundreds of testimonies, but never one quite like mine. Sterling was waiting for me in the hallway, along with Jasper and Clementine and Mrs. Whitfield. They'd driven over during the lunch break, and seeing their faces proud, relieved, full of love, made everything worth it. "Did you get the bad man?" Clementine asked, wrapping her little arms around my legs. "Yes, baby," I said, picking her up and feeling stronger than I'd ever felt in my life. "We got all the bad men." The verdicts came back 2 weeks later, guilty on all counts for every defendant. Zeke got life in prison without the possibility of parole. The others got sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. The international buyer they'd been preparing to sell the operation to had been arrested trying to board a plane back to Eastern Europe. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences. The real victory was the 73 victims who'd been rescued from various operations across 3 states. The real victory was the trafficking routes that had been shut down, and the buyers who'd been arrested. The real victory was that Pearl and Marcus and Isabella and dozens of others could sleep safely in their own beds at night. A year after the trial, I was invited to speak at a conference for law enforcement officials about recognizing and responding to human trafficking. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of police officers and federal agents and social workers, I felt the full weight of how far I'd traveled from that trailer park in Millbrook. The thing about being invisible, I told them, is that it makes you an expert observer. Victims of trafficking learn to see everything and say nothing, to notice patterns and remember details, because our survival depends on it. When you're investigating these cases, remember that the person who seems most traumatized, most damaged, most unlikely to be a reliable witness, might actually be the one with the most valuable information. After my speech, a young police officer approached me. She was probably my age, with kind eyes and a handshake that spoke of determination. "Ma'am," she said, "I work trafficking cases in Birmingham, and your testimony today just helped me understand something about a case I've been working. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story." That's when I knew this was my purpose. Not just surviving my own trauma, but using it to help others recognize and respond to trafficking when they encountered it. Sterling had been right all those months ago when he said I deserved to see the world and pursue my dreams. But what he couldn't have known was that my dreams would grow directly out of my worst nightmare. If you're listening to this story and you've survived your own trauma, I want you to know something. Your pain doesn't define you, but it doesn't have to be wasted either. The things that nearly destroyed you might become the very tools you use to help others heal. Your voice matters, your story matters, and you deserve every good thing this world has to offer today. 3 years after that night in the auction barn, I'm a certified victim advocate, working with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. Jasper is 9 years old and wants to be a scientist. Clementine is 7 and has never known a day of hunger or fear. Mama completed a residential treatment program and sees the kids every other weekend. Slowly rebuilding the relationships she damaged, Sterling and I work together now, not just as family, but as partners in this fight against modern slavery. He proposed 6 months ago, not because he felt obligated or because I needed saving, but because we'd built something real and lasting out of the ashes of our childhood. Trauma Mrs. Whitfield is officiating our wedding next month in the backyard of our home, surrounded by survivors who've become family and FBI agents who've become friends, and the life we've built together out of love and second chances, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be free. The little girl who used to hide in trailer 57, who thought she was too fat and too poor and too broken to matter to anyone, doesn't exist anymore. In her place stands a woman who knows her worth, who uses her voice, who refuses to be invisible. And every single day, I wake up grateful for the journey that brought me here, even the parts that nearly killed me. Because sometimes the most beautiful thing about being human is our ability to transform our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths. Sometimes the people who buy you at auctions turn out to be the family you never knew you needed. Sometimes the cousin who promised to save you when you were 8 years old keeps that promise when you're 22. Sometimes the story that starts with being sold like livestock ends with standing in courtrooms and conference halls, speaking truth to power, and refusing to let anyone else suffer in silence. This is my story. This is how I learned that I was never invisible at all. I was just waiting for the right moment to step into the light.
Some hearts move slow like rivers through the night, but mine found you and everything felt right. I tried to wait, I tried to stay away, but love like this, it doesn't ask, it stays. And every time you breathe I hear a song, a quiet pull that's been here all along. I'm falling into you, like stars into the sky, like ocean waves that know